Hello, I'm Gerald Turner, Chancellor of the University of Mississippi. We're delighted to have you join us here at Ole Miss for what promises to be a very entertaining evening of debate by 8 of our nation's leaders. This is the first presentation in the Robert M. Harron Leon Hess Distinguished Lecture Series. These friends and others have made this presentation possible. Over 5,000 people are here, most in their seats. We're ready to begin. Please join us.
This Firing Line Live special debate is presented by the University of Mississippi with SECA and the Mississippi Authority for Educational Television.
Funding for this special event is provided by these grand patrons of the University of Mississippi: Entergy Corporation, Robert M. Harron, Leon Hess Lecture Series, and South Central Bell. Additional patron support is provided by Deposit Guarantee National Bank, Robert M. Harron Foundation, Stuart Irby Construction Company, John N. Palmer, and the University of Mississippi Foundation. Other sponsors include Andrew Jackson Life Insurance Company, Dudley Hughes, Jitney Jungle Stores, McCarty Farms Incorporated, and Trustmark National Bank.
Good evening. From the University of Mississippi, welcome to a special live all-star firing line debate. The subject tonight is capitalism. Once again, though, William F. Buckley has chosen to frame the issue in a way that puts the opposition on the defensive. The official question on the table tonight is, resolve, free market competitiveness is best for America. At a time when even the communist world is turning to free markets, I don't think you can expect tonight's negative team to come out for socialism. But you can expect them to give the affirmatives a hard time about whether unfettered free markets are always the best solution in areas like corporate mergers, healthcare, the environment, and so on. And you can probably also expect Professor Galbraith to question whether this mythical beast called free market competitiveness even exists. My name's Mike Kinsley. I'm editor of The New Republic, and I play moderator tonight. Despite what Barry Goldwater once said, moderation can be a virtue, or at least I hope so. Now, anyway, let's bring on the debaters. Where are they? Here they come. Looking at the affirmative team, I'm struck by the fact that these avatars of capitalism, among them, have only one who is an actual businessman. That one is the captain, Mr. Buckley. Unfortunately, his business, the National Review magazine, has lost money steadily for its entire existence. But neither that sad fact nor his distinguished television career on non-profit, non-commercial public broadcasting has dimmed Mr. Buckley's enthusiasm for private enterprise. I suppose it has something to do with the difference between salvation by faith and salvation by works. Mr. Buckley is joined tonight by 3 other enthusiastic pro-capitalist non-capitalists. Jean Kirkpatrick was America's ambassador to the United Nations during the Reagan administration. She got that job because of a famous magazine article she wrote about a decade ago, asserting, among other things, that communist regimes never turn into capitalist ones. Perhaps someone will press her on that point about developments that have been happening lately. Congressman Newt Gingrich of Georgia is House Minority Whip. I have to take back my assertion that he has no business experience. Come to think of it, he and his wife founded a little business a while back to promote a book of his thoughts, which is now under investigation by the House Ethics Committee. Maybe it would be more accurate to say Mr. Gingrich wishes he had no business experience. Finally, there is Mr. HUD himself, Paul Newman. I mean Jack Kemp. Mr. Kemp was a regular in these debates when he was a mere congressman. Now, for his sins, he is Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and his department is suddenly in the headlines every day. I think even Mr. Kemp would admit that before his arrival, a few capitalists got carried away at HUD. Or maybe he wishes they would get carried away now. Now, looking over at the negative team, I can't help noticing that free market capitalism doesn't seem to have done them any harm. They all seem pretty sleek and prosperous to me. The negative team captain is former Senator and former presidential nominee George McGovern. I learned this afternoon that Senator McGovern actually is a capitalist himself. He owns a hotel in Stratford, Connecticut. Like Mr. Buckley's magazine, Mr. McGovern's hotel loses money. So both these experts on capitalism are on a par as far as that goes. Professor John Kenneth Galbraith, now emeritus at Harvard, is probably the world's most distinguished living skeptic about capitalism as practiced in America. He is, however, of Scottish descent, and therefore, unsurprisingly, an enthusiastic practitioner of capitalism in his personal life. He is famous, for example, for negotiating his own book contracts rather than leaving such distressing commercial dalliance to agents. He happens to save 15% that way. Congresswoman Pat Schroeder is a veteran of these debates. Rumor has it that she has been approached by several toothpaste companies offering vast sums of money if she will put her dazzling toothy smile to work on behalf of their products. If she has refused, it is not out of contempt for capitalism, I think it's safe to say, but rather out of a desire to keep her teeth razor sharp for chewing up political opponents. Former Senator Gary Hart is now practicing law in Denver. As a lawyer, he is undoubtedly doing far more harm to America's free market economy than he ever did as a politician. Ladies and gentlemen, I control the clock tonight. When I bang this gavel, you have two choices. You can either stop talking, or in the true spirit of capitalism, you can offer me a suitable amount of money to continue. Mr. Buckley, please come to the podium and propose the resolution.
Ladies and gentlemen of Mississippi, my enlightened colleagues, my benighted adversaries, we are here in surrealistic circumstances. We have to pretend here at the University of Mississippi that it is an open question whether free market competitiveness benefits society. We are here at the same time that a former member of the Politburo tours the United States advising in solemn accents that Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the tatterdemalion remains of the nuclear-bloated, bread-starved dream of Marx and Engels and Stalin and Lillian Hellman, is asking American businessmen for advice. The Soviet Union, he is reported as having said yesterday, is confronting realities. What realities? Perestroika. What does perestroika mean in English? Well, in the kind of English spoken by American Republicans and Southern boll weevils, it means that 2 + 2 are equal to 4. The historical documentation that competitiveness leads to economic progress is no longer more questionable than that mathematical proposition. So, why are we pretending tonight that there are two sides of this question? Well, there are perhaps reasons to do so in the shadow of Yoknapatawpha County, where William Faulkner, within a few hundred yards of where we are gathered here, reminded us of the tenacity, indeed sometimes of the ennobling tenacity of the anti-modernist tradition. We must all understand that there are victims of competitiveness every time Ole Miss wins a football game. Someone is destined to lose. Every time a Republican wins the White House, a Democrat loses it. Every time Democrats win Congress, the Republic loses. No, we don't deny that there are poignant consequences to competitiveness, and we agree that it is a mistake to suppose that free market competitiveness discovers that which is the best by aesthetic criteria. I would hardly argue that this were the case in a society in which the least concatenation of the Jefferson airplane exceeds in popularity Fernando Valente's rendition of the Goldberg Variations. We are here to say that competitiveness in economics is at least as important as competitiveness in politics, which we call democracy. So clearly superior is our case that I search for compassionate relief for our adversaries, and of course I have found it. On Monday I received a letter from a Mr. Waters of Ocala, Florida, in which he introduces me to the 1988 book called The Price Guide to Autographs. Please note, he writes in his covering letter, that a signed photograph of you is worth $10, while a signed photograph of John Kenneth Galbraith is worth $20. He goes on to tell me that he and his wife attempted to decipher this aberration in the competitive market. His wife decided that I was better looking than Mr. Galbraith, which disposes of that problem. The second point explored by Mr. Waters, the law of supply and demand, might be at work here. He comments possibly John Kenneth Galbraith is so cheap that he won't buy photographs to send out to collectors. You, on the other hand, may flood the market with your signed photos, driving down the price. Perhaps, he concludes, Professor Galbraith's knowledge is twice as valuable as yours, but since manifestly this is not the case in respect of the study and ventilation of social truths, he concludes that autograph dealers are, as he puts it, a pack of liberals. That, he explains, would also tell us why Walter Mondale goes for $39.20 while Gene Kirkpatrick goes for $20. Ladies and gentlemen, I offer Professor Galbraith and Senator McGovern, Mrs. Schroeder, and Senator Hart the one satisfaction in their brief against competitiveness in the market, namely that Mr. Galbraith's autograph and the music of the Rolling Stones is worth more than my autograph and the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. I give him that life raft to float on.
Senator McGovern.
I'm delighted that Michael Kinsley informed you that I'm now part of the free market competitive system as a hotel operator. And I'm delighted to be in this charming city, not only because of the charm of this university and the city, but I'm also here partly to persuade Bill Buckley that the next of these debates should be held in his home state at the Stratford Inn, Stratford, Connecticut. We need the money. Free market competitiveness is a nice-sounding phrase, because all of us believe in freedom. All of us believe in competition. No one of us advocates the centralized, state-run systems of the communist or fascist world. So the question is, what is the debate all about? It is about whether there is a proper role for the government in protecting us against the excesses and the weaknesses of a big business, free enterprise economy. We all believe in the right to make a profit on our labor and investment, but we have learned that without some public standards, without some ground rules conscientiously enforced by the government, free enterprise leads sooner or later to industrial sweatshops, to dangerous coal mines, to the exploitation of workers, to contaminated food and drugs, to the squeezing out of farmers and small business by monopoly capitalism, and to the degradation of our environment. In recent years, when free marketeers persuaded the government to ease off on public regulations of the savings and loan industry, those same free marketeers then exploited the deposits of their customers by unwise and reckless investments and a lavish lifestyle. Now they present a bill to the taxpayers for these excesses of $150 billion. We weren't invited to the party, but we're expected to pay for it. Free marketeers operating in the housing industry took advantage of a weak regulatory situation in Mr. Kemp's housing agency, I must say, before he came on the scene. And these exploiters ripped off the housing scene for profit at the expense of the nation's homeless and the nation's taxpayers. The same thing happening in the Food and Drug Administration when the regulations were relaxed. By the same process, the free market has threatened the air of this country, the purity of our water. It's dumped toxic waste into the soils and our streams. It's put carcinogenic chemicals into our food and drugs. Free enterprise should not include the freedom to destroy the physical basis of life and health in this society. So I conclude on this note: free market competitiveness, yes, but in concert with a government that seeks to strengthen and nurture the economy while protecting the American public against the excesses of greed and excessive concern with private profit at the expense of the American people.
I hate to interrupt your conversation, but it's time for Mr. Kemp to come to the podium, make a brief remark, and then submit to questioning from the other side.
Thank you, Mr. Kinsley. And Chancellor Turner, thank you for your hospitality here at Ole Miss. And what a pleasure it is to be back on PBS with the firing line debate. What an exciting time it is to be alive, to be a part of a world that is beginning to recognize that what President Bush said in his inaugural address is so very true. The age of the dictator is over. Freedom works. Free men, free women, free enterprise. That there's a solution to poverty. One word, freedom. Free men and women, free markets, free enterprise, free trade, freedom itself. To be sure, this is not 18th century laissez-faire Darwinian biological determinism where only the fittest will survive, and where people are free to dump their garbage on your front lawn or into the air. What we're talking about today is the market economy to which the world aspires, where students in China recognize that freedom of economics has to be matched with freedom of political opportunity, where they're willing to hold up Patrick Henry and say, give us democracy or give us death, where men and women in the Baltic are holding hands, seeking the opportunity to be free. And where Poland today has celebrated the solidarity movement, which is beginning to replace communism and Marxism. The students in Tiananmen Square are quoting Adam Smith and Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry and Dr. Martin Luther King. They're not quoting Mao Zedong and Karl Marx, and frankly, they're not quoting John Kenneth Galbraith and George McGovern either. I look forward to this debate because I want you to know President Bush believes so much in democratic capitalism. He appointed one to be Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and we're going to make it work.
Don't go away. Don't go away. Stay there. Okay, now it's time for questions. As they say on Jeopardy, please make sure it's in the form of a question and not a speech. Mr. Hart.
Secretary Kemp, in spite of the fact that your remarks had very little to do with the topic here tonight, I wonder if you would... I'm sure, based on what you've said here and previously, that you would strongly support legislation to end government subsidies for agribusiness, for the defense industry, for energy and transportation at least.
When I talk about freedom working, I'm talking about an opportunity ladder upon which people can climb and a net under which people shouldn't be allowed to fall. But subsidies should not be reserved for big business. Subsidies should not be reserved for rich farmers. They should be reserved for the poor and the people. And I pledge to help make it work in housing where people are empowered, not big business. And I believe the same thing is true in agriculture. We want that net under which farmers and small farmers and family farmers should not be allowed to fall.
We're talking about big farmers, agribusiness, giant corporations. The net doesn't permit them to fail. The net of the federal government and the taxpayers of the United States doesn't permit them to fail.
With all due respect, former Senator Hart, you were a part of the Congress that helped build up the greatest subsidy program of trickle-down economics for farmers the world has ever known.
Mr. Kemp, your party has been in the White House, I think, for the last 10 years. What have you done to end it?
Well, I'll tell you what. We are bringing about the greatest economic recovery without inflation
That's not the question.
This country has had.
That's not the question.
Farmers today are prospering and are going to prosper more under free market economics than under socialism.
Ms. Schroeder.
Well, let me say, I wanted to salute you, Jack, because I read the New York Times piece on you. I thought it was very fair.
Thank you.
And I think you ought to be at our table after reading it, because you said in there that while in 1980 you talked about when the economy went up, all boats would rise, you now saw in your wisdom that some boats were stuck on the bottom.
I've always believed that, Pat.
And, well, it phrased it that it had been a change, but whether or not it was, I think that's very moving, and that's been one of the problems in your party, and I think you know you're swimming against the current. When you talk about a safety net, there's a lot of people on your side who don't believe in that safety net. Now, I salute you for having the courage to stand up on that side and say it. I'm only saying you're on the wrong side, because what we're talking about over here, as George McGovern put out, was really a mixed economy where you try to make sure that everybody gets the opportunity to move ahead.
I think there was a question, but
Yeah,
the
and
answer...
I just want to say, why aren't you over here?
The answer would be, Pat, that you can't help the poor when the nation is becoming poor. And under the policies of your own party back in the 70s, we were getting poor. At the same time, the country was experiencing 13% inflation.
Well,
And the only real way to finance a safety net is to make sure that you've got enough growth in the economy, a number of new businesses, a number of new jobs, a number of new opportunities for people to become entrepreneurs. And I would suggest all of the empirical evidence is on the side of the Reagan recovery and what George Bush wants to now export into the inner city, the ghetto, and the barrio, and that's what I'm involved in at HUD. So I look forward to helping finance your safety net.
well, Jack, that's where I'm saying I think we're going to have trouble, because financing that safety net after the tax cuts and things that you put in, it's like the ha, we fooled you. The tax cuts only driven the debt, and we now get the Godzilla award. And I think that we really have undermined a lot of that, and it's going to make it more difficult to put safety nets in.
Ask yourself the question, Pat, and I think the American people need to ask the question, what would have happened had we left the tax rates at 70%? What would have happened had we left the capital gains at 49%? What would have happened to this country's economy had we continued the policies of the late 70s and early 80s? Look, the difference between you and me and our side and your side, from my standpoint anyway, is that you measure the compassion of our society by how many people need the safety net, and I think in a Judeo-Christian society, the ultimate measure of compassion is how few people need welfare, food stamps, and government spending.
Professor Galbraith. Professor Galbraith.
Let me just say,
Make it a short one, please.
I agree with you.
No, let Professor Galbraith.
Oh, I shall be very brief because my question is specific and I don't think lends itself to rhetoric. Is it your impression, Mr. Secretary, that the competitive system will build houses for the homeless and poor?
Well, there's an area where we really have a...
Oh, I wanted yes or
well,
no.
the answer, no, there's no yes or no, John.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, there is, because I am involved in spending, along with the Congress, $1 billion. You asked the question, sir, and I get a chance to respond, which is that this year, under this president's budget, we're going to spend over $1 billion in building shelter for the homeless. We have an obligation to the poor, to those without shelter, those without food, and we do, most people believe, need to build a net or platform under which the poor and those without cannot be fallen.
I welcome you to my side and away from
That is not
Buckley.
your side, sir.
Gentlemen, please. Professor, thank you, Mr. Kemp.
Thank you.
Professor Galbraith. You just said that you relish brevity, and here's your chance to prove it.
Well, I must tell you my pleasure in being back again at Ole Miss, where I enjoyed visiting the lecture some years ago, and my pleasure in being brief, which is the reward that one has from being on the right side. Members of my generation, somewhat older than some people here, remember that in the 1930s, before and after, the competitive system was in danger of collapsing. There was the problem of the poor, the problem of the farmers, the problem of child labor, the problem of the homeless. The list goes on, and was combined with vast, insupportable unemployment. And the great revolution of those years involved the much increased area of action by the government, by the state, to move to correct those matters. This was the welfare revolution, the Keynesian revolution, in which all industrial governments took a measure of responsibility for the well-being of people and for the level of employment, the level of production in the economy. And that is the change, all of it involving an increased area of responsibility by the state that is under attack tonight. You'll go along with that? I hope not. The chairman has clapped his hands. That is an encouragement that I have one final word, which is, let us, my friends, regard this as a purely practical matter as to what we leave to the market, what we do by the government, and let us leave these rhetoricians and these theorists to their own enjoyment. Thank you.
Professor Galbraith, stay put. Stay put. Stay put. I think Mr. Gingrich has a question for you, which you wouldn't want to miss, I'm sure.
I find it fascinating that one of the leading rhetoricians and theoreticians of the modern left would worry about those on our side with those titles, because after all, with your books and your speeches over the years, you clearly believe passionately in an ideology. The question is not about the welfare state.
Come to the question, Congressman.
The question is about free market competitiveness, not about dismantling the welfare state. And my question for you is simple. When we try to figure out where the money comes from to help the poor, you studied the Great Depression of 1929. Doesn't it shake your faith in government as a system to know that the Great Depression of 1989 is in the Soviet Union with government ownership and government planning, not in the West?
Oh, by no means. The Great Depression of 1929, on which I share an interest in books with the congressman, the Great Depression of the Great Crash of 1929 was followed by a catastrophic depression. And the Great Crash of 87 was a very, very mild bubble by contrast. And the difference, sir, was the much enlarged responsibility assumed by the state, by the government.
Professor Galbraith, I'm interested that you're still advocating the expansion of the role of government. And I wonder, as I listen to you, whether you believe there is any point at which the expansion of government's functions or powers becomes counterproductive.
Oh, I share with you, and I must say, Bill Buckley's going to frown at you for that question. I share with you the belief that this is a purely practical question, that it is not to be resolved by conservative theoreticians. We should have government action where it is necessary and useful, protects our future, and protects the poor, and there are many places where obviously we do not need it.
Could you give us some?
I'm happy to welcome you to my side.
You couldn't point in a general way to the level or the point at which government regulation, expansion of government powers and controls becomes counterproductive.
There is no question about that. I'd answer that without endorsing Professor Laffer's curve, which, as you know, was written for the first time on Kleenex, which many people thought should have been put to a better use.
Mr. Buckley.
Mr. Galbraith,
Could you ask
you
the
opposed
question, Bill, and not make a point?
Sorry. Well, by the way, the last time you used that line about laughers, you used toilet paper, which is much more fun. You insisted we should be guided by practicality. Now, a few years ago, you came out against government help for Lockheed and government help for Chrysler. So did I, guided as I am by the presumptions of my own faith. Why didn't you reach the practical conclusion that to help the people who work for Chrysler and to help the people who work for Lockheed is the same thing as helping the people who work for large farming industries?
There are times, Bill, and this is something on which we agree, when you put enjoyment ahead of even the truth. And the joy that I had that day in seeing the conservatives from Ohio, California, and elsewhere stout conservatives, tough conservatives, who were going to vote for Lockheed and going to vote for Chrysler against my argument was just more than the enjoyment was greater than I could forego.
In other words, your counsel would be in future situations for government to intercede, Congress to intercede to help any faltering business.
No,
after you've gotten over the joy
there are
of
many cases where with my distinguished opposition here, I would allow the businesses to fail. Many cases. I do not belong to that branch of socialism which identifies socialist action with the corporate jets coming down on national airports.
At some point, will you make the connection for us, or is he out of time?
If you can do it in 15 seconds, it's all yours.
I'm sorry, I did not hear the last question.
If you can do it in 7 seconds, you can do it.
I shall surrender because when you have both your audience and your House on your side, there's no point in going on. Thank you.
Mr. Kirkpatrick, Ms. Schroeder, if you could ascend the podium.